Tech interviews aren't great. If I've learned anything from my time in the hundreds of interviews I've done, both as an engineer looking for a job and as a technical manager running a team and making hiring decisions, I found that almost every company is doing interviews pretty egregiously incorrect. It's so important to have a goal going into an interview. And if the goal isn't setting up the engineer for success, to figure out just how successful they can be at your company, then you're probably failing as an interviewer. The goal of this video isn't to shame a bunch of people for doing interviews wrong, and it's not to tell you as an interviewee to only interview at companies that do things right. It's to generally talk about what the current state of things is and propose a new model for interviews. I hope this video is useful if you're an engineering manager, as well as a new grad looking for your first job. Even if you're just exploring the idea of programming as a job, I hope we can find something valuable in this video. To start, we should talk about what most technical interviews look like today. The harsh reality is, until you hit principal level interviews, you're usually going to show up in a call or an office, have some engineer that's been there for 1 to 7+ years, pull up a random technical question from a book of questions they've already wrote at the company, all random code questions that are usually very algorithmy and LeetCode heavy. Half or more of them boil down to, do you know what algorithm this problem is based on, and can you apply it correctly in the language of choice? And that doesn't teach you a whole lot about the people. The reason this method of interviewing has lasted so long isn't necessarily that it's a good way to identify engineers who are of quality. It's more that anyone willing to learn that LeetCode grindy crap is willing to sit there and grind through things that make no sense. And for most companies, most things don't make a lot of sense. So it's a perfect alignment with how a company like Google has a bunch of services from 20 years ago that someone has to maintain and no one wants to. Doesn't that sound a little bit like LeetCode? The relationship there is no mistake. The vast majority of companies are doing LeetCode because it's the easy default that's existed forever. That's also why they're running too many servers and making tech that's too hard to work in and maintain. And I often find that the interview culture says a lot about the type of company you'll be working at if you get that job. So what do I propose instead? The big thing that I really want to push for is giving more agency to the interviewee during the interview. I firmly believe it's my role as a leader and manager in the companies I work at to set up my teams and set up my engineers to be as successful as possible. And if the interview process is not built around that goal, then I don't think those engineers are going to be as comfortable as they could be, and more importantly, as they should be when they work for you. So the first thing I set out to change with my interview process is the level of comfort, trust, and more importantly, agency that I give the people I am interviewing. So how do I do that? I usually will send out a document to the candidate a few weeks before the interview, if possible, that details multiple different options on how this interview can go, as well as going in depth on the shape of the interview and what they can expect. I don't want anyone to show up feeling like they're being caught off guard by a curveball or something that wasn't expected. Obviously, that's a part of the job, some amount. But the types of bugs you're going to find on the job are probably going to be similar to the types of bugs you'll find in a good interview question that is technical and thoughtful enough. So what does this document look like? I actually publicly shared the one that I sent to Dan Abramov when I did an interview with him all the way back in 2021, because Dan wanted to show people what it looked like for a more senior person that might not practice LeetCode a lot to do a technical interview. And he did a few of these. He did a fake interview with Ben Awad and a handful of other creators. And I like to think mine was the one that highlighted the strengths of Dan the best. Because the goal of my interview wasn't to challenge him with a really strong, hard LeetCode problem. It was specifically to throw him in the ringer for what it would look like to code every day inside of the stack and inside of the types of things we work on. And obviously, Dan, being the creator of React, was pretty good at it. He ran into some problems, but he did a great job overall. And when you compare his performance in my interview to the other ones, it's kind of sad to see that the only one of those interviews he would have passed in the traditional sense was mine. And I like to think Dan Abramov would be a good hire for a lot of companies. So what did this interview look like? What did I send him ahead? Before my interview with Dan, I sent him this document. And honestly, since Dan is such a strong open source contributor, I probably wouldn't have done a technical interview at all if this was real life. Because Dan's goal here was to show what it looks like to interview someone who's on the core team of React and is the creator of Redux, we decided to do a more technical interview. But you don't have to do technical interviews if you know the person's technical. Like, this is not an essential step in the process if you have other ways to validate their abilities. Let's break down what these options look like. The link to this is in the Dan Abramov interview if you want to take a look at that. The link's there. So the options I give are based around the different styles of interview I have found to be good ways for technical people to showcase their skills. The first one is the traditionalist, which is the everyday LeetCode problems that you get a lot. I don't mind this being an option because it can showcase somebody is technical and capable. And if this is what they've been training for, and this is the interviews they've been doing a bunch of, I genuinely don't mind giving them what they're comfortable with because, again, the goal of the interview is to set the interviewee up for success. If this is what you're comfortable with, then this is what you should do in the interview. I have no problem with that at all. It's a great way to showcase your skills. It's just not the way that is best aligned with what we build at most of the companies that I've worked at, which is why I offer other options, including option 2, the pragmatist, which is a realistic code problem. Rather than some weird algorithm you have to solve, I'm going to give you a more literal, straightforward, here's the thing you're building, let's do it step by step. The example I have here is the Pokédex problem, which I gave for a lot of interviews. I've probably interviewed with this problem over 100 times, which is why it sucks I put it in here because now I can't use it anymore. The goal of the Pokédex problem is to see how well somebody understands the core concepts of React and building applications. So I start with a JavaScript blob, just a JavaScript object with some info about a Pokemon, and tell you to create a reusable component that takes this as props and renders it with this information. And then I give you an array and I ask you to put them all in a table. And then I provide you a selection component. This is where it gets interesting. So you have to start integrating different things and understand state management and the relationship between components better. This exists. It has this type for its props. How do you use this to actually filter the table? And I think this problem is really strong because it lets me, as the interviewer, gauge your understanding of React core concepts piece by piece by expanding on them throughout. But this is also great as an interviewee because it's the kind of work you would be doing every day anyways. And you don't have to practice for this type of interview the same way you would for a LeetCode. You can just go build things and you're practicing this every day already. But if you don't want to do that, you want to do something that's literally the work you're already doing every day, I made an option for that too, the realist. I love this option. The goal of this one is to let you show off how you like to work already. Hit us up ahead of time. Let us know there's a project you want to work on and a bug you want to fix, a feature you want to add, anything at all. Ideally, let us see the repo ahead so we know what we're getting into. And we'll do a pair session. Just sit down for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and you can show me how you work and solve the problem with me as a pairing exercise. Since this is a huge part of what we'll be doing anyways, there are a few better ways to understand how capable, technical, and most importantly, how somebody is to work with. This is one of the best options to understand how an engineer works. And it's amazing to me how few places offer something like it. I love this option. I've been surprised how few people take it. But generally, the goal here is to set people up for success the way that they are used to. And that's why I have this final option here, the specialist. If you have a better way to showcase your skills that doesn't fit into these options, tell me about it. I would love to try new interview techniques and styles. It's genuinely fun for me. And if you think there's a better way to showcase your skills than what I've listed here, show me. Tell me about it. Let me see it. I am so down. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We can do another interview, one of the other styles. That's fine too. It's not a big deal to waste an hour and a half of my time if the thing on the other end is an incredible hire. But the decision to force one method so you spend as little time as possible in those interviews is just not great. I really don't like it. I also didn't put any take-home type stuff here because I am still not sure how I feel about take-homes. I personally actually like doing them when I'm interviewing, but when I'm the interviewer, I feel bad knowing that certain types of employees in certain positions won't be able to justify spending that level of free time working on a thing without being paid. It also just kind of feels wrong to not pay someone for work that theoretically could be used. But yeah, take-homes, I'm not sure about yet. But again, if someone here said, hey, I'd prefer a take-home, we would make one up for you. It's not that hard to make of a problem. And again, whatever makes you the most confident in how you can showcase your technical abilities is what we want to do. I have some notes at the bottom here. The what do I do now? This is again, like I wrote this as though I'm doing a real interview because I want you to see the documents that get sent to our actual recruits and potential new hires when we send these things out. And I'm really proud of this document. I hope it's helpful for those of you who are both looking for places to work as well as those who are doing interviews in the first place. I do have one more important tip I want to bring up here though. And I wish I started doing this earlier, and I've seen an insane amount of growth from those who have picked this tip up too. Do more interviews and do them on each side. If you were qualified enough to get a job you're also qualified enough to interview for that job. You might not be as good of an interviewer as other people on the team, but you still bring a lot of value to the hiring process. Please, if you're able, talk to your manager, no matter how new you are to the role, and try to get on track to start doing interviews as soon as you can, because there's no better way to understand where you fit on the team, where new people could fit on the team, how interviews go good or bad. And most importantly, when you're on the team, if the people you're looking at are going to be a good fit or not. Being involved in the interview process is one of the best things you can do to better understand your role, your team, your impact, and most importantly, how valuable you are. And the more interviews you've done as the interview giver, the better your performance will be as an interviewee. And when you start to go interview at other companies to get a promotion, a new role, whatever, you'll be better at interviews if you've given more interviews. I thought that would be obvious, but I'm amazed at how many people don't realize that and don't take advantage of the incredible free resource most companies give in letting you do interviews. So do them and do as many as you can. Like it helps so much. I even got in a little bit of heat at a point in my career because I was doing 6 interviews a week sometimes because I thought it was so important to be involved in that process and also smooth it out for the ones that were rougher. I quickly became the person recruiting would pull in when interviews were going poorly to be like the lunch buddy to help cheer someone up and get a good feel for if this interview process is failing them or not. And I was able to save a few people that would have fallen through the cracks with that and also confidently figure out if some people just weren't quite ready yet in terms of where they were at in their career and their abilities, which is also totally fine. A good interview shouldn't be scared to give the candidate feedback on how to improve for future interviews. You're not giving them cheat codes by telling them what they did wrong. You're giving them a growth opportunity and giving them some value back for the time they spent interviewing. Please, for the love of God, if you reject someone in the interview process, tell them why. There's no reason to not let them know. I think that's all I have here. Sorry for the weird rant and how long it has been since I talked about interviews, but I'll be honest, I haven't done a whole lot of them recently just due to the nature of the market and where we're at Ping. It doesn't mean I don't think about them a lot though, and that I'm not super concerned about the types of interviews I'm seeing and the experiences many engineers I've referred have. If you do good interviews, that word will spread. People like me will hear about it, and we will be more excited to recommend engineers to work for you. Your best engineer is only as good as your interview process. And if you have a process that makes good engineers not feel respected and they drop out, your team is now limited by that process. So seriously, if you care at all about the quality of engineering at your company, step up and think through your interview process. If these tips were helpful, let me know. If you want to check out the video of me using this to interview Dan, I'll pin that right there. Early apologies for the audio quality, video quality, and everything else. That was my second ever YouTube video. I had no idea what I was doing, but made a lot of progress since. Thank you guys as always. Peace, nerds.